Been the subject of a lengthy legal battle to continue his life support. Well, we can speak with our reporter Ellie Costello, who's outside the hospital live for us now. Ellie, what's the latest you're hearing?
Well, Archie Battersby's parents have lost their High Court bid to transfer him from the Royal London Hospital to a local hospice to die. Archie's parents wanted him moved to have a peaceful and dignified goodbye. The hospital said that it wasn't in Archie's best interests and that it was a risk to transfer him to a hospice. Well, a judge at the High Court today said that she was satisfied that staying at the hospital was in Archie's best interests. The judge also gave permission for Archie Battersby's life support to be withdrawn from 2 p.m. this afternoon. That's unless his parents submit a new appeal directly to the Court of Appeal. And I can confirm that the family are working on that right now. We've just had this statement from Holly Dance, who says, "We are broken, but we are keeping going because we love Archie and we refuse to give up on him." So the lawyers are working on that now. There is a deadline of 1:30, so that gives them just under half an hour to submit a new legal appeal, and it will come right down to the wire.
Ellie Costello live there for us at the Royal London Hospital. Thank you very much indeed for that update. The two candidates vying for the Conservative Party leadership position have clashed over warnings of a recession. The Bank of England predicts the UK will face its longest recession since the financial crisis in 2008, as it increased interest rates by half a point to 1.75%. The former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, warned his rivals' economic plans would damage the country, but Liz Truss says the most important thing is getting the economy growing to avoid a recession.
The reality is we are facing a recession if we carry on with our business as usual policies. We need to do more, and that's why I'm determined to reform the economy and keep taxes low. If there is a recession, that will mean people losing jobs, that will mean more economic hardship. So that is why it's so important that we do all we can to grow the economy.
Liz Truss there, but the former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, says he wants to be honest with the country about the economic challenges ahead.
I'm not sitting here or standing here promising you tens and tens of billions of pounds of goodies straight away, because I don't think that's the right thing to do for our economy. I think it's risky. I think it risks making the inflation problem far worse and costing you all far more. I want to be straight with the country about the challenges we face and what is going to be required to fix them. And that's why I think you can trust me on this, because I'm prepared to do that, even though it's going to cost me politically.
However, a video has emerged showing the Tory leadership hopeful Rishi Sunak telling a campaign event that as Chancellor he diverted government funding from deprived urban areas towards more affluent towns. In the video obtained by the New Statesman, the comments were made to grassroots Conservatives in Tunbridge Wells in Kent 7 days ago. In response, Mr Sunak's team have defended the comments, saying he altered the formula to help both towns and rural areas.
Managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve, because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas. Then that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that.
China's foreign ministry has announced the country is severing a number of diplomatic ties with the United States, including top-level military, following a visit by the US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. The country has also sanctioned Ms Pelosi and her immediate family, accusing her of interfering in China's internal affairs and threatening the peace and stability of Taiwan. Beijing has launched a number of missiles into waters near Taiwan in response to the visit, saying the US is playing with fire. US media reports the White House has also summoned the Chinese ambassador to condemn the escalating actions. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the differences between the US and Taiwan need to be resolved peacefully.
The fact is, the Speaker's visit was peaceful. There is no justification for this extreme, disproportionate, and escalatory military response. It is incumbent upon China to continue to seek to resolve those differences peacefully, not to use coercion, and certainly not to use force.
Antony Blinken there. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to the briefing with Mark.
Simon, thanks very much. Welcome back to the briefing. Now, with the looming recession, which could last a year or more, it's definitely going to be a tough succession for whoever becomes Britain's next Prime Minister. But the two remaining opponents, former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, have some very differing views on how to get us out of the mess. Liz Truss pledging tax cuts worth around £50 billion. Rishi Sunak insisting unfunded cuts will only pour fuel on the fire of inflation, as he said. And it's not looking too promising for Mr Sunak, with this video of him just being leaked by the New Statesman.
From all of you, I managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve. Because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, then that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that. I made sure as Chancellor across government, not only do we increase local government funding.
Yes, that was the former Chancellor addressing the, rather finely dressed people of Tunbridge Wells, Royal Tunbridge Wells, as some might call it, most likely suited and booted in one of his many designer suits, some may say. Let's hear from Conservative MP Paul Bristow, because, Paul, you're backing the Liz Truss campaign. The Truss camp must be cock-a-hoop at this. He's actually shot himself in his rather finely booted foot.
Well, look, I don't specialise in or particularly enjoy blue-on-blue attacks, so I'm not going to go out and attack Rishi or the supporters of Rishi in this interview today. What I will say is we've got a month of this to go, and unfortunately we're going to see more and more, I think, an almost element of desperation from some people supporting Rishi Sunak, and that's not always going to reflect very well on the Conservative Party after this, because we have to come together. And some of the attacks we've seen on Liz Truss from members of the Rishi Sunak camp, I think, are regrettable, and I would urge them to stop it, because we've got to come together and we've got to make sure we govern this country properly at the end of all of this.
Take back our comments about the suits and the boots or whatever, which is the Nadine Dorries approach. But, I mean, this is not about personality. This is about very central policy, the whole issue of levelling up. And just to remind people what he said, this is where he said Labour had shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas. That needed to be undone. I have started doing that. He's basically saying he's taking levelling up, levelling down.
Well, I think he's trying to appeal to his audience and that he was speaking to. But my central message would be to Rishi Sunak is, if you want to win this race, you've got to appeal to everybody in this country. There are plenty of Conservative MPs like me who represent deprived urban areas like Peterborough, and we're certainly not going to take well boasting that you're taking money away from areas like mine. Actually, I don't think that is the case, because I think if you look at Peterborough, we've had £23 million of Towns Fund money, we've had millions of levelling up money. That's what he delivered as Chancellor. Why don't you just reflect on that record, Rishi, the record that you and the Prime Minister delivered, because I think it's a jolly good one for places like Peterborough, and stop really trying to play games in this electoral contest. Let's be positive, and let's try and see two camps promising, positive messages for the Conservative Party and for the British people, and let's see who wins. But I'm confident it will be Liz.
So let's ask how on earth you can be positive about the economic situation that's facing both of them, given what the Bank of England said yesterday. The conclusion that many economists, not just Rishi Sunak, have made is that Liz Truss hasn't got a war chest to do anything with. This 30 billion so-called headroom, or the piggy bank in the economy, has now disappeared. It's gone out the window.
Well, look, what I would suggest is this. During the 1980s, when everyone said that Margaret Thatcher was mad for trying to reduce taxation, was mad for trying to rip up the conventional economic orthodoxy, she went ahead and did it anyway. And we had a hugely successful economic transformation in the 1980s. I think that's what Liz Truss is saying again. Let's look at what happened in the past. We can reduce taxes. We can grow the economy. That's what it's all about. At the end of the day, this is about growth. And if you strangle business and you strangle families with increased tax burdens, we're not going to get the growth that we need in order to grow the economy and generate more tax revenue at the end of it. What we've been doing hasn't worked. So let's try this new way of doing things, and it's worked in the past, and it's proper conservative economic thought. You know, the idea you reduce taxes, the economy grows, people keep more money in their own pockets, they spend more. It's not that, rogue. It's what the Conservative Party have been talking about since the 1980s.
So you've invoked the spirit of Thatcherism. Why then has Lord Lawson, who was Margaret Thatcher's Chancellor, backed Rishi Sunak?
Well, you'll have to ask Nigel Lawson that question.
He says because it's the issue of good housekeeping and not actually blowing the budget.
Well, this is not about blowing the budget. This is about generating economic growth. And if you generate economic growth, you get more tax revenue. And guess what? When you get more tax revenue, you can spend more on public services. I think that's what this is all about. I think that's central Conservative thinking. And, I'm surprised people are treating this as anything other than that.
Yeah, the problem is she hasn't got the time to build those revenues and get that growth. When you get into number 10 and whoever's Chancellor in number 11 on the 6th of September, they're going to have to go for an emergency budget, and the cash is not there to help all these households and business facing the energy price increases.
Well, I think what you've said is absolutely right, in the sense that we need someone who's going to get on with the job from day one, and that's Liz Truss. She's got a proven track record in government. She's served as a Treasury Minister. She's very clear about what she wants to do. She's got that, as I say, track record in government. So let's get her there, and let's get this show on the road. That's what I would say.
Paul Bristow in Peterborough, thank you very much indeed for your views this hour and joining us here on The Briefing. Let's remind you that we are still here in the studio with economist Vicky Pryce and Claire Pearsall, Conservative Councillor, who we have now made Prime Minister for the day and Governor of the Bank of England for the day.
I can keep it the whole day.
You can keep it for a whole day. You might be able to solve a few problems in one day. Who knows? Let's pick up the points that Paul made there, and really the fact that you've got to go for growth in the economy. And this is how we've got the Liz Truss camp saying this is how we solve the problems, cut the tax, and that will really stimulate the economy.
You hear this argument. I know, and I apologise for that. But you kind of think that this message has come over and over again, and it doesn't stack up financially when you start looking at the real state of the problem that we have. What was refreshing from that was Paul Bristow, who is on Team Truss, being remarkably level-headed about the whole contest, and the blue-on-blue fighting that we've had isn't doing us any favours. And to keep sort of retreading the whole ground on the economy, we all know now where the candidates stand. I want to see them looking at the other areas that affect us all. The National Health Service, immigration, transport, education. We've heard so little about those.
Housing,
yeah. Planning, all of those things. We heard Liz Truss's comments that she would now not like to concrete over the green belt and build 1 million houses. Well, that's great, but what is her plan? How can we encourage people to build more houses in the areas that people want to live and get people onto the housing ladder? We've not heard that from either candidate right now. So I think that we need to put the arguing over the Treasury to one side, as important as it is. But we've heard that argument. Let's move on to all of the other things. Right, OK, thank you for that. But, Vicky, clearly we have got a huge problem facing us from what the bank said yesterday, warning of a year-long recession, perhaps even more, and trying to explain why we need these high interest rates. I just picked up on something that you may have some inside knowledge on, and that was another economist, a chap called David Blanchard, or Danny Blanchard, like the footballer, who was on the Monetary Policy Committee as an external member at the beginning of the 2000s. Now, he was seen as a contrarian at the time, and he wanted an interest rate cut in 2008 before the financial crash. Others on the bank poo-pooed it. We had the crash, and they then said, yes, you were right, we should have cut interest rates. He said on Channel 4 last night that the bank should be cutting rates now, not putting them up. Indeed, I've heard him say that a number of times recently, because, of course, what he's worried about is that we're pushing the economy into a recession by raising interest rates. And, of course, in order to stop inflation, if that's indeed what you want to achieve, then you have to raise interest rates very significantly. That's the traditional weapon. Indeed, yeah. And he'd be very much worried about that. And he's got a point. But, of course, the thing to bear in mind is that what the Bank of England is doing right now is not really raising inflation particularly sharply. We have... If you look at the latest inflation data,
the real interest rate that the bank now has as a base is at minus 8%. So by comparison to where the 9.4% inflation that we had, but of course that's moving to 13%, if interest rates stay where they are, then, and they don't move very much, even if they move by 50 basis points or even a whole point, they're still going to be minus almost 10%. So we are talking about really low real interest rates. So it's not going back to where we were in previous crises, where interest rates went up to double-digit figures. That's interest rates, when inflation, of course, was
it
even
15% it hit with Norman Lamont?
Indeed, just before we left the ERM.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's not quite the same. So I think what he's worried about is that if it's taken seriously, that we want to use interest rates to do something about inflation, given that it's all external factors and we can't do it by just raising interest rates a bit, that requires you raising interest rates really significantly.
A short, sharp shock.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen.
Right.
And therefore, he doesn't need to be that worried. It is going to slow the economy down without any doubt, but not to the extent that he worries about.
The other aspect that will be facing the Prime Minister and new Chancellor is the summer of discontent, as it's been called. All these people striking to try, quite rightly, to get more in their pocket to deal with the higher inflation. Public sector pay, they're looking at 5 to 6%. If we're talking about 13% inflation, they're not going to be satisfied with a 5 or 6% increase, are they?
No, and I think that was always the danger. And when you look at the rail strikes, the driver strike that happened most recently, they wanted in line with inflation. Well, inflation, if that goes up any further, then how far do you have to go with your pay increases? You can't just keep increasing it. And you're right, it's sort of 4 or 5%, that's suddenly not going to look very good. They'll want 9, 10, 11%. We don't have the money for 4 or 5, let alone the 9 or 10. So where's it going to stop? And I think we all need to calm down a bit and look at the whole country and say, do you know what? There isn't any money. And I know that phrase has been used before in Treasury terms, but there really isn't. And we have to be a little bit austere in these times and get through this winter. This is going to be extremely tough. Next year, we can start looking at whether there's money for pay increases. I don't begrudge people that, but we're just not right now.
Calm down and tighten your belt.
Absolutely.
Right. OK, well, let us know how you think our new Prime Minister and Governor are getting on. Always interested to hear your views. The Tory leadership rivals Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, setting out, of course, their competing plans to deal with this looming recession. But now we've got this new leaked video, too, of the former Chancellor. So chances of him becoming the next PM, are they looking a little slim now? Coming up after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
And welcome back. You're watching The Briefing this Friday with me, Mark Longhurst, with the Bank of England, of course, announcing yesterday it will have to raise the base rate of interest by another 0.5%, 1.75%. It might sound relatively quite small to what we were used to, of course, in previous decades, but quite the opposite when one reflects it's the steepest rise in the UK for some 27 years. And if you thought it can't get any worse, well, that well-respected living standards think tank, the Resolution Foundation, amongst others now, warning inflation could hit 15% by early next year. The bank having said 13.3% by October. It's all because of the soaring energy and food bills. Well, what does that mean for all these cash-strapped households, people struggling with higher mortgages, and indeed even for industry? Well, the bank's insisting it had little option, but was it really the best decision? We're joined now by Alexandra Lloyden, who's Director of Consultancy at St James's Place, and James Tatch, who manages the mortgage analytics side of things at UK Finance. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us. Alexandra, I was putting the point to Vicky Price here in the studio a little earlier that one economist, Danny Blanchard, had said he would have actually cut interest rates at the moment to keep stimulus going in the economy if we're facing a recession. Do you share that sort of point of view?
Look, I think we're in unprecedented times, Mark, and the priority of the government and the Bank of England is to get that demand side inflation down. There are very few options on the table, and so I don't think they have many other options, indeed any other options, other than to increase interest rates at this moment in time.
The point he was making, if we don't do it now, it will become embedded, and therefore it feeds into people trying to get higher wage deals, as we've been discussing, and really the bank then can't get a hold of things.
Well, that's fair, but at the same time, we need to face into the demand side inflation issue that will only get worse if we don't face into it and challenge it right now. We are in very unusual times, quite uncertain times as well. The high rate of inflation is driven by the Ukraine war. Who knows when that's going to end? My view is we need to face into that now. We need to encourage people to borrow and spend less and face into that increasing level of inflation. Because if that continues to rise, that will only impact on families' ability to sustain themselves.
Well, James, let's bring you in because we're told that the Monetary Policy Committee went 8-1 to actually decide on the 0.5% increase. Part of the calculation, they said, was that they realised that I think it's about 80% of the mortgage market have fixed rate deals, which mean that they can still withstand the pain for a while yet.
That's 75%. That's
okay.
Correct. So 3/4 of the entire mortgage stock is on fixed rates and won't see any immediate impact from the rate rises.
And do you think that's a fair reflection? Because some of those deals, they only last 2 years, don't they?
That's correct. We have, in terms of the outstanding stock, we have about 1.3 million borrowers are going to come to the end of their fixed rates this year, and another 1.8 million next year. They will have to refinance. Some of them will get material increase in their payments when they look to refinance. But the mortgage market is competitive, and there are good deals available both with their internal lender or on the open market.
We're getting a bit of a break-up on the signal, James, but we'll stay with you. I mean, I was going to ask you, is the industry able to meet the needs, perhaps talking to people about extending mortgages, about changing the criteria? Because, of course, we had the bank also indicating it was going to take the stress tests out of the system, i.e., can you afford I think it was about 4 times salary limit. Some people now, I think nationwide, saying if you've got the income coming through, 100,000, we'll lend you 5.5 times income.
Well, the stress test that they've removed relates to the interest rate that they have to assess whether the borrower could still afford their mortgage were rates to rise to that level. The fact that the bank has removed that does not affect the fact that all lenders have their own stress test anyway. So they will all apply their own stress test. It's just the mandated amount of the stress test that the bank has removed.
Alexandra, back to you. I guess the biggest stress test, though, is what not just households can actually think they're going to be able to cope with in terms of increased interest rate payments and the increased fuel costs and the increased food costs, but it's industry as well, because they're borrowing very often on a flexible platform rather than a fixed rate. This is really going to cost industry a lot more as well.
That's right, Mark. I think everybody's going to be impacted by this. It's not just going to be individuals and families, as you say, it's going to be in industry as well. I mean, we've got quite low unemployment at the moment. We may see that increase over the coming months. We are in this together. I think everybody's impacted in different ways.
Yeah, a lot of people looking at what's happening with industrial relations may think that some actually have got a little bit more muscle in terms of squeezing better pay deals. I mean, how much will this impact on the various calculations that both the bank and Number 11 will be making if public sector particularly is pushed further towards the end of the year?
Well, I mean, I think, as I say, we're in really uncertain times, Mark. It's really difficult to give an accurate view or even an answer to that sort of question right now.
Okay, well, thank you both for your view on that. Let's put those points back to our two experts in the studio who, let's remind you, we've made Prime Minister and Bank of England Governor for the day. That was from St James's Place, one of the top financial concerns in the country. You know, if they've got question marks, well, what's going to happen to Number 10 and Number 11 when they get back into their stride in September?
Absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing is that, as we've been hearing from Alexandra, who you talked to, she was saying that we should be borrowing less and spending less, which is interesting. It doesn't normally come from a financial institution. But when you look at what's been going on in the financial sector itself, you mentioned yourself, Mark, the issue of different sectors getting different pay rises, and therefore some much more able to deal with the inflation issue than others. Well, the financial sector, of course, has been one which has been standing out, if you like, in terms of giving very substantial... And
lawyers in London, we understand, going through the roof.
Professional services is the second one. And, of course, profits in the financial sector, if you look at the banking sector itself, have increased very significantly over the last year. So they have benefited hugely from the growth in the economy. So, in a way, when we're talking about the two candidates, growth is really good for them.
So we are getting a better tax take from those better salaries.
We are. I mean, there is a question, since we've already got windfall taxes on energy companies, whether you should have windfall taxes on other sectors that are doing rather well as well and redistribute that.
You read my mind, because I was going to put to you, Claire, has the government been, again, using this phrase, missing in action in terms of really saying to the energy companies, we heard how much profit Shell made, BP have made, they've actually given money back to shareholders, they've put I think Shell had an 8% one-off payment to their staff. I mean, should this Tory government really have taken those energy companies to one side and said, look, you need to help out by actually giving us some windfall payments?
We did put in a windfall tax. Now, I'm usually against those measures and had not been supportive of it because it is only a short-term view. You got that money in and now we need some more. I think it's unfortunate that those profits and those dividends were paid, and it's appalling. However, we don't need to just be pointing the finger at those companies when, as Vicky has just said, financial institutions have benefited enormously from the pressures going forward. So how about we do introduce a windfall tax on those sectors? I don't think you can always pick on the energy companies, and I do appreciate that. Right, these are large numbers going back to shareholders.
Exactly the point. I mean, they always say, don't tax us because we have to put the money back in terms of investment and exploration. So they haven't done that. You know, they've actually given the money back where actually there's a share buyback, which indicates they had 3.2 billion too much cash to know what to do with it.
Absolutely. And I think the unfortunate fact is that you will never get those companies coming out and defending what they've done. And I think that's really bad of them. I can understand why they don't do it, but I do think that they could do some more work, perhaps putting money into charities that help those in fuel difficulty, fuel poverty. They could do so much more to make themselves a little bit more approachable, a little bit more likeable. But I do agree that That is such a bad look.
And Vicky, just picking up on Claire's point, it would just be a one-off sum. It's not going to be a regular income from a windfall tax.
Well, it all depends. If the price of oil stays very high, I think the allowance is at present that you can carry on paying extra tax as well. So that's something which can carry on. But it is interesting, since we're talking about the two contestants for the leadership, that Rishi Sunak, in fact, took down the extra tax that banks were paying just recently. There was something that had been set up since the financial crisis. So that's gone down. Plus, of course, he fought very hard to exclude the financial sector from the minimum 15% global tax, which has been agreed for lots of other multinational companies. So they have benefited hugely. And, of course, as governor of the Bank of England for the day, I need to remind everyone that all the quantitative easing that we did that now we're being attacked about helped the bank's liquidity very significantly and allowed them to make the profits that they made.
And kept the wheels turning. Yeah. For the moment, thank you to you both. But let's reflect on electric car sales motoring ahead. More Britons taking a stand against those high fuel costs by going electric. More on that in a moment. First, let's get the latest news headlines with Simon.
Thanks, Mark. It's 1:32. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Holly Dance, the mother of Archie Battersby, has said the family is broken but will keep going after losing a High Court battle to have him transferred to a hospice. Archie's been in a coma since April and has been the subject of a lengthy legal battle to continue his support. The family have been given until 2 p.m. today to lodge a challenge with the Court of Appeal. The two candidates vying for Conservative Party leadership have clashed over warnings of a recession. The Bank of England predicts the UK will face its longest recession since the financial crisis in 2008, as it raised interest rates by half a percentage point to 1.75%. Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak warned his rival's economic plans would damage the country, but Liz Truss argued her plans provided the bold action needed to tackle rising prices. A video has meanwhile emerged showing Rishi Sunak telling a campaign event that as Chancellor he diverted government funding from deprived urban areas towards more affluent towns. In the video obtained by the New Statesman, the comments were made to grassroots Conservatives in Tunbridge Wells in Kent 7 days ago. In response, Mr Sunak's team has defended the comments, saying he altered the formula to help both towns and rural areas. China's foreign ministry has announced the country is severing a number of diplomatic ties with the United States following US House of Representatives Speaker to Taiwan. The country has also sanctioned Nancy Pelosi and her immediate family, accusing her of interfering in China's internal affairs and threatening the peace and stability of Taiwan. Beijing has launched a number of missiles into waters near Taiwan in response to the visit, saying the US is playing with fire. US media reports the White House has summoned the Chinese ambassador to condemn the escalating actions. TV online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Mark.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.214 to the dollar. The pound is 1.186 to the euro. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,472.64 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to The Briefing this Friday with me, Mark Longhurst. Now, this might not come as a surprise, but UK car sales fell yet again in July amidst all those supply chain problems, particularly the global shortage of semiconductors, the electrical bits and pieces they put in the cars. The UK's new light commercial vehicle market following suit, declining for the 7th consecutive month in July. But not all doom and gloom for the particular sector. Electric vehicle sales, well, yes, they're motoring on ahead, if you pardon the expression, accounting for around 1 in 7 of all new car sales. But though much higher prices than your typical car costs and ongoing battery charging issues, we're asking, why are more people actually changing lanes to electric vehicles? Well, joining us now, Erin Baker, Editorial Director at Auto Trader, the online marketplace for car buyers and sellers. Erin, thanks for joining us. Clearly, they're quite a bit more expensive, new and indeed second-hand. And people might be wondering, is it worth it, given what electricity is costing now when you plug them in to charge them up?
Yeah, I think there's no question that people are still thinking about making the switch to electric. Demand is still really strong for electric cars. I mean, we're seeing on Auto Trader about 25% of all visits onto the site are to look at electric cars when it comes to new car searches. But they're accounting for only 1 in 7 sales. So the interest is there, the passion is there to make the switch and go electric. But then people get put off by that sticker price, which is still on average 36% more than you would pay for the equivalent petrol or diesel car. But yes, energy prices are going up, but so are petrol and diesel prices. It still works out far cheaper in terms of running costs to have an electric car.
But the other question, of course, is the infrastructure and how many charging points there are, and how quickly you do charge the car up. If you're doing a long journey, you can maybe add an hour or two in to get the charging time added on top.
Yeah, undoubtedly, range anxiety is still a huge caveat, a huge barrier to the mass volume uptake that we need to see of electric cars. I think at the moment there's something like 40,000 public charging points in the UK, far more home charging points and destination charging points at offices and restaurants, so on. And we are seeing those charging points still kind of congregated around the more wealthier postcodes in the UK. And if we need to get to that mass adoption by 2030, or around 2030, then we are going to need an acceleration in public charging points and not just in those wealthier postcodes.
And the other issue, of course, is, you talk about range anxiety, is that we don't seem to have cracked the battery technology, and that many of the advertised mileage rates, 250 miles per charge, don't actually take into account bad weather, cold weather, rain, you're using the wipers. You can suddenly find yourself 175 miles and you're out of juice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's an equivalence there with petrol and diesel. Manufacturers used to quote the most favourable miles per gallon for petrol and diesel, and it was very few drivers who could actually get those figures. And the same is happening with electric. Car brands will always advertise the maximum possible range, but that will tend to be with your heated steering wheel turned off, with the air conditioning turned off, and not doing 80 miles an hour on the motorway. But I think as more consumers adopt the technology, as more consumers get used to the jargon and the way that electric cars are sold and represented, they'll understand, look, if I'm going to do a massive motorway journey at 80 miles an hour, then I'm probably going to see 20 miles less in my range. But range is increasing, batteries are getting more efficient, the cost of manufacturing the batteries is coming down. We do expect to see price parity between electric vehicles and their petrol and diesel counterparts end of 2024, hopefully. If we stay on track, I do think, though, it would be a very good thing if the government were to look again at incentives given this cost of living crisis.
Come on to that and how the auto sector is going to cope with that. I mean, we've seen, second-hand car prices way up because you can't get a new car because of the problems with semiconductors and so on. But is the auto sector really bracing itself for a slump, given that people literally don't have the money to buy a new car or even a second-hand car?
I think there's still far too much pent-up, well, not too much, there's a glorious amount of pent-up demand still in the system. The problem, as you say, is with the supply, this lack of semiconductors affecting all parts of the supply chain. We don't expect to see that rectify itself anytime soon. So that means that prices are going to remain high for new and used vehicles. And there isn't going to be a massive crash or a massive drop in those prices anytime soon. Certainly not. We don't think for the next couple of years. The used car market is a fairly stable market at the best of times anyway. So anyone who's thinking, well, should I hold on? Look how high prices are at the moment. Probably shouldn't be holding on because we aren't going to see a huge correction in the market.
Erin from Auto Trader, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thanks for joining us here on The Briefing.
Thank you.
But let's return now to the breaking news this lunchtime. After the strong criticism this week of Liz Truss's plan to cut public sector pay in the regions, well, Rishi Sunak appears to have been caught out while campaigning by saying that he would move funding from poorer areas into wealthier places such as Tunbridge Wells. With this video obtained by the New Statesman magazine, let's have a listen and a watch.
Managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve. Because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, then that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that.
Well, we think that was June 29th in Tunbridge Wells. What will it do for the campaign? We're still welcoming our new Bank of England Governor, Vicky Pryce, and our new Prime Minister, Claire Pearsall. Thank you for being with us. Joking apart, this could be a fatal blow for Camp Sunak, couldn't it? If I guess there's a public reaction. People are still digesting it. But when one actually realises what he said, levelling up was supposed to be so important, that's gone out the window.
But I think levelling up has been one of those problems that nobody has managed to explain exactly what it is. We understand that...
Well, it was helping deprived urban areas, we thought, no?
But the definition of it was always very sketchy. Even under the current Prime Minister, he couldn't adequately explain what it was, and neither could Michael Gove as Levelling Up Secretary. So I think that perhaps this might be a storm in a teacup. The next gaffe will come along. This is a long campaign. We've got another 4 weeks of it.
Of course.
So I don't suspect this is the last we've heard from either camp as to who has done the worst thing, who has misspoken, who has been misrepresented.
But here's the thing. We had the gaffe, if you use that term, from the Truss camp over the public sector pay away from Westminster and reducing it for teachers and firefighters and so on as a result. Who's advising these candidates? Because they're going to be a future Prime Minister. Surely they should be on top of these sorts of things and see the elephant trap before they fall into it.
Well, they absolutely should. And that is the job of advisors. It's also the job of their colleagues who are surrounding them in a campaign team to make sure that they are aware of these things and how you can crisis manage your way out of it. And that's the most important thing that you have to have around you. Not just people that agree with you and tell you you're fantastic, but the ones that can actually turn around and say no to you. I think that is arguably more important than anything else. If somebody has the guts to tell you, no, that's a bad idea, don't do it, you need to keep them employed.
OK. And you've been, Vicky, in the centre of governments at crisis times, particularly on the economic front. They are facing quite a storm ahead. Given that we've got another month of this going on, what state will the economy be in another month when that in-tray is filled up with all these problems about energy costs, food costs, not knowing where the money is going to come from to help both households and industry?
Well, what we're seeing through the summer is that, and we saw that also in the last quarter, is that people, although their confidence has been reduced very significantly, are still going out to spend a certain amount. Retail sales have suffered, but consumer spending overall hasn't so much. People have gone to restaurants, pubs, they've gone on holiday or tried to get on
Tried to go on holiday, yeah.
Tried to go on holiday. But what we know is that from various surveys, and we've seen that in other countries too, the expectation is that you do what you can now, and then in the autumn you really cut back, because that's when, of course, in October we get the extra increase in electricity.
So austerity budget in the autumn for a new government?
No, what they need is the opposite, of course.
Right.
The government needs to counter that, and it will. So having worked myself in government at a time of crisis, what you tended to do, but of course you didn't have quite that inflation problem at the time, you just threw everything at the problem. Not knowing necessarily what might work. So when we think
scattergun approach.
And you know that some of them, like what happened during COVID, when some of the money, perhaps it was used inappropriately, but you always knew, and the HMRC knew that 10% of whatever they did was perhaps going to be subject to fraudulent acts.
Companies that took the money and then ceased trading and never pay it back.
That sort of stuff. So you know that but you know that the risk of not doing something is considerably greater. And I think that's precisely where they're going to be. They will know that the risk of not doing something will exceed them somehow or other intervening to ease the pressure in the pockets of people, not necessarily going for hugely inflationary stuff, but certainly seeing whether there is a way of reducing that direct impact on individuals was going to be very crucial.
On what, all right, you're the Bank of England governor. Let's take that away and you can talk now about politics. I know you're enjoying that. What do you do on September the 6th, or start doing on September the 6th?
You can look at the headline inflation, for example, and you can do something about lowering VAT, possibly. People say that may be inflationary, but actually it's going to impact particularly those at the lower end of the...
Alistair Darling did the same as a Labour chancellor.
Did the same, but of course at the time we didn't have inflation. But now we do. But nevertheless, since it is the people at the lower end of the pay scale who spend most of the money on food,
and energy
and transport, they will still spend, they will hopefully be able to afford to do that and feed themselves. This isn't going to affect prices particularly because those are set internationally. So you do absolutely need to do that and focus in that area. You can bring, therefore, the headline inflation rate down by doing something like that. You can bring fuel prices, which are already coming down. The positive things are oil prices have been coming down. We have quite high employment, low unemployment, so at least there is something there. We have savings in the population. That's still there, not at the lower end, but you still have got that there. And food prices internationally have been coming down in the last 3 months. And they're still up 27%, but they're coming down. And look what happened when the shipment of grain was announced. So
leaving
wheat
Odessa.
Prices went back to pre-pandemic levels, so pre-war levels, sorry. So you've got something there that's happening. But of course, everything could go wrong just like that. But there are some positive things there. So you've got a little bit of room for manoeuvre.
Wriggle room.
Yes, you can do something a little extra. And then hopefully, which is the final thing, and I know you and I have touched on it at some point, is reform the way in which we do our electricity cap. It makes no sense the way that we've got it, where it goes up the way it does, and it pushes our inflation rate way up what others in Europe perhaps will be seeing because of the way we charge.
Because the French have not done that, have they?
The French told their energy supplier 4% increase only.
And that's it, yeah.
And that, of course, it's state-owned. So maybe we should think again.
EDF, right, OK. Thank you for the moment. Stay with us, because we're just getting now the views of someone else on this instance of Rishi Sunak seemingly shooting himself in the foot, some may say, by saying at a party event in Tunbridge Wells, Labour shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas. That needed to be undone. I have started doing that. Let's get the views of Jerry Hayes, a former Conservative MP and now a barrister. Jerry, you've seen a few gaffes over your political career. Not yours, of course, but what's
plenty of mine, Mark.
Well, yeah. What's the Sunak campaign up to? Are the advisers not telling him about the elephant trap waiting for him?
I just don't know. In fact, you've taken me by surprise on this. I haven't actually heard this because I've been in court. So what actually has he said? Is he saying that it was wrong for Labour to put money into deprived areas? Is that what he said?
Well, we're going to try and get the clip up for you so you can listen and look at it now. I think we can just play that for you. Bear with us. Here we go.
Managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve. Because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas. Then that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that.
Now, Joe, you're a very clever barrister. You may actually take a slightly different sort of conclusion from that. But I'm listening to him thinking he's telling Tunbridge Wells, you're going to be OK. I'll make sure that you've still got funding. And if it means taking it away from deprived urban areas, so be it.
Yeah, I suspect, and literally I'm doing this on the hoof, he was talking about the Barnet Formula, which was giving a lot of English money right up to Scotland. And I don't think he put it very elegantly, very clearly. I think that's what he was talking about, because the Barnet Formula basically gives an awful lot of money to Scotland because of deprivation, because of bad health. So I suspect, I'd love to see that speech in the whole context. I'm not a Sunak torchbearer. I just think he's the most competent person for actually winning an election. And that's what it's all about, I hope.
And therefore lies in the main question, competence for both candidates, bearing in mind the gaffe that Liz Truss seemed to create over the whole issue of public sector pay away from London. I mean, one wonders, and you are a veteran of Conservative Party politics. Who is advising them, or maybe not advising them?
Well, I know this is the trouble. Everyone thinks politics is about yes, minister. It's more in the thick of it. I mean, obviously, what happened with Liz Truss, she ripped out something, or one of the advisors rips out something from the Taxpayers Alliance policy book. So this is good. We can save about 8 billion quid. And then suddenly realised it includes doctors and nurses. Where I thought it was quite interesting on Sky News last night with Kay Burley, she didn't say, well, look, we just messed up. She was just saying, well, it just shows I can deliver. I just thought, well, hang on, this is a policy you've totally messed up. Look, there's going to have to be some nimble footwork by Rishi and his team to explain exactly what he meant. The trouble is, when you're on the stump, you're on the hoof, you forget there are cameras there, and that is a big mistake. So let's see what the Sunak team says this evening, and I would imagine there'd be an awful lot of backtracking.
Jerry, thank you very much indeed for your nimble footwork on the hoof, as ever. Much appreciated. Thanks for your time.
Nice to speak to you again, Mark.
OK. Bye. Now, today, the first day of the famous Edinburgh Fringe, the festival returning to the Scottish capital with artists from across the world waiting eagerly to see if this is the moment where their dreams come true and they become stars of stage and screen. But not quite as happy as the good old days, I'm afraid. Around 2,000 performers hitting out at the vastly inflated, as they say, and unaffordable cost of accommodation and living in the city. Well, now, Edinburgh is introducing a short-term let control area, no less. So anyone who wants to rent their home in an Airbnb style will need to apply for planning permission from the council. We're joined now by Russell Quirk, a housing expert who can help explain why the council have done this. I guess I have to actually admit, Russell, I've stayed in an Airbnb in Edinburgh, and very nice it was too, but it's a huge growth area for cities across the United Kingdom, of course.
Yeah, and look, there's no denying that Airbnb fills a gap, one that perhaps isn't served or hasn't been traditionally served very well by hotels. Airbnb would say that the predominance of people staying in their properties has a hugely positive effect on tourism and the local economy. In fact, they cite those benefits in the tens of billions of pounds across the UK. This actually, though, Mark, is not just something that affects Edinburgh. So the Scottish government, the SNP-led Scottish government, introduced fairly recently short-term let legislation, which now provides that all local authorities in Scotland are actually able to oversee Airbnb hosts, Airbnb landlords, by way of licensing. Now, my question would be, well, what's that going to achieve? Because actually, when you read a bit of the legislation, what it doesn't say is that there are particular barriers to entry in terms of the type of property or indeed the type of host. So it doesn't look as though this is actually going to control volume. What I would venture is that this is the Scottish government and a lot of Scottish councils, including Labour-controlled Edinburgh Council, that are simply jumping on the bandwagon. This becomes a monetisation exercise. And the reason I say that is because prescribed within the legislation is that each of these hosts, no matter how often they let their property, so they might only let it for a week of the year at a minimal cost, each host will have to pay a licence fee of up to £436 to the local authority. And get this, it gets worse. Each council has up to 12 months, so it's a whole year, to actually grant the licence. What on earth are those hosts, some of them relying on this money for their own cost of living mitigation? What hope have they got of being able to let a property if it's going to cost that sort of money and it's going to take that amount of time for the bureaucrats to get their acts together? I think it's a crazy scheme.
OK, Russell, thank you very much indeed for your view on that. I'm afraid we're out of time, but thank you for joining us. Indeed, thank you for joining us here on The Briefing, and to Vicky and to Claire, our Governor and Prime Minister for the day. We've brought you all the political and consumer news we can. Thanks for sticking with us. Tune in again Monday at 12. Until then, have a lovely weekend. Goodbye.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather outlook. Not much rain in the forecast across the south. A dry one here today and sunny for most of us through this weekend, thanks to a large area of high pressure that's slowly moving in across the country, and it's going to stick around through the weekend and beyond. This weather front will bring a bit more cloud tomorrow across the north. And today across the north, we do have some showers. We've already seen one or two heavy ones and a scattering of showers over North Wales, northern England and parts of central and eastern Scotland will continue. Hit and miss, not everywhere seeing them, but where they do occur, so the odd heavy one is possible, but tending to ease off, I suspect, through the afternoon. Sunny spells for western Scotland, Northern Ireland and across the south, where temperatures getting into the mid-20s, high teens, low 20s for most. So actually a little cool for the time of year. It'll be a fairly cool evening as well. Still a few showers around this evening if you're heading on the roads across northeast England, eastern Scotland, but they'll quickly fade away. For most, it's going to be a dry night, but that weather front we saw earlier will start to bring the rain back to the highlands of Scotland and the Western Isles through the early hours. A fresh start to the weekend. It really will be quite a cool night, certainly compared to earlier in the week. Temperatures widely down to single figures. A sunny start to the weekend, certainly for most of England and Wales. A cloudy start for Scotland and Northern Ireland. There will be some rain pushing through parts of Scotland, but come late morning, it'll mostly be confined to the far north, with just a few showers likely through the central belt. The odd shower for Northern Ireland, mostly dry here. Certainly sunny spells for the majority across England and Wales. And after a cool start, feeling pretty warm from mid-morning onwards into the mid-20s through the afternoon. On Saturday evening, again, most places set fair, just a bit more of that rain lingering across northern Scotland, where it'll also be fairly breezy. There'll be some patchy rain across northern and western parts of Scotland on Sunday, but otherwise, again, most places dry, and we are going to see temperatures starting to rise through the weekend into next week.
The man who wants to be the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, sits down with me, Esther McVeigh and Philip Davis this Saturday. Don't miss it. Does the former Chancellor have what it takes to beat his rival, Liz Truss? Can he regain the momentum he's lost over the last couple of weeks? All questions and all answers put to the Tory leadership hopeful, Rishi Sunak, tomorrow, 10 a.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
The Talk About on GB News with me, Bev Turner, sitting in for Alex Phillips. For the next hour, we're going to discuss today's big stories. Hosepipe bans may have been introduced in parts of the country today, but there will be no watering down here. Keep me company. I know, Stephen Pound is here. I just winked at him. We might have seen that as well when we came on air. I'm also going to be joined by Alan Mendoza, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. And here's what else is coming up on the show. Oh, sorry, I thought you were going to play them a video. Right, Tory leadership candidates Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. I'm too busy flirting with my guests. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss clashed over the Bank of England's recession warning in their latest TV debate. But whose plans would buy your vote? And with a looming recession and rising inflation, we'll be talking about how much worse the cost of living squeeze is likely to get. Plus, terrible story. As we are coming on air, we are hearing that Archie Battersby's family have lodged an appeal against the High Court's decision that he can't be transferred to a hospice to die. We're going to have the very latest. Plus, as China steps up military drills and sanctions after US Speaker Nancy Pelosi after her trip to Taiwan, we'll be discussing what this means for future relations. That is what we're going to be talking about for the next hour. But what do you want to talk about? Email us gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's time for the news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 3 minutes past 2. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Archie Battersby's family have lodged an appeal with the Court of Appeal after losing a High Court bid to have him transferred to a hospice. The 12-year-old's family had pledged to fight to the end so he could spend his final moments with dignity. This morning, a judge ruled it was not in Archie's best interests to be moved to a hospice. He has been in a coma since April and has been the subject of a lengthy legal battle to continue his life support. The two candidates vying for the Conservative Party leadership position have clashed over warnings of a recession. The Bank of England predicts the UK will face its longest recession since the financial crisis in 2008 as it increased interest rates by half a percentage point to 1.75%. The former Chancellor Rishi Sunak warned his rivals' economic plans would damage the country, but Liz Truss says the most important thing is getting the economy growing to avoid a recession.
The reality is we are facing a recession if we carry on with our business as usual policies. We need to do more, and that's why I'm determined to reform the economy and keep taxes low. If there is a recession, that will mean people losing jobs, that will mean more economic hardship. So that is why it's so important that we do all we can to grow the economy.
Meanwhile, former Chancellor Rishi Sunak says he wants to be honest with the country about the economic challenges ahead.
I'm not sitting here or standing here promising you tens and tens of billions of pounds of goodies straight away, because I don't think that's the right thing to do for our economy. I think it's risky. I think it risks making the inflation problem far worse and costing you all far more. I want to be straight with the country about the challenges we face and what is going to be required to fix them. And that's why I think you can trust me on this, because I'm prepared to do that, even though it's going to cost me politically.
Managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve. Because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, then that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that.
Meanwhile, that video emerged showing Rishi Sunak telling the campaign event that as Chancellor he diverted government funding from deprived urban areas towards more affluent towns. In that video obtained by the New Statesman, the comments were made to grassroots Conservatives in Tunbridge Wells in Kent 7 days ago. In response, Mr Sunak's team has defended the comments, saying he altered the formula to help both rural towns and rural areas. Network Rail has voted to accept a pay offer after several strikes and disputes over pay and conditions. The Transport Salaried Staffs Association says its managers have accepted the offer, which includes a 4% increase on base pay from the 1st of July and discounted travel for employees. But the union has said it will stay in talks with Network Rail to continue delivering a fair deal for its members going forward. China's foreign ministry has announced the country is severing a number of diplomatic ties with the United States, including top-level military following a visit by US House